Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. Engagers, once again, we're here on Professor Game Podcast, and we have Alessandro today. But before we get started, Alessandro, are you prepared to engage?
Of course. That's my job.
Absolutely, because he's an associate professor at the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts, School of Architecture, Design, and Conservation, and he is also the Czar of Player Experience at Modl.AI and has been straddling between the game industry and academia for years. Clearly our type of profile. He has also been an assistant professor at IT University of Copenhagen, associate professor at the Northeastern University in Boston, and he's now, as you know, in the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts. In his research, he employs psychological theories of personality, perception, motivation, and emotion to design games with the purpose of investigating individual differences in behavior among users of digital entertainment. He has very focuses on topics like developing behavioral analysis methods that are able to account for granular spatial and temporal events, avoiding aggregation, and as well designing and developing visual analytics tools that can enable any stakeholder to produce user-driven content, leveraging advanced statistics and machine learning. So very, very, very interesting topics. He's also been a senior user researcher and data scientist at Massive Entertainment, a Ubisoft studio, and he enjoyed tremendously investigating the occult behavioral patterns and novel player modeling approaches, while also identifying the best processes for transferring knowledge from academic research to industry practice. As you know, he's involved now with Modl.AI, which is providing AI services to the game industry, and he's exploring how to triangulate the data-driven insights with surveys and lab observations to advance the field of predictive analytics. So a lot of things going on in your life, Alessandro. Is there anything that we're missing?
No, I guess you cover pretty much everything. In the past year, when I started working at the design school, I started working with the students actually creating novel interaction models. So we have a paper that was presented at the Conference of Games in August. We're basically trying to use intimate controllers where players have to touch each other. Very inappropriate in this period of history. But we are actually looking at how touching each other makes a difference in how people perceive and process the experience of play. And we had some very interesting, finding, but we can talk about it a bit later.
So that's very exciting. Like, what were the? I mean, can you, without going into the depths, but what did you find out?
Well, we had a simple tower defense game where two players have to cooperate to fend off hordes of enemies that are trying to eat your wedding cake, basically. And we made the game in two versions. With normal controls, where you press one button for the two entities that the player control to merge into one giant monster that can slay a lot more enemies. So we have a version where you use a button to do it, and another version where you basically have to hold hands. We're using a Makey controller for the players to hold hands basically while they're playing, so they can merge. And the games are virtually identical, but this little difference, just touching versus pressing a button, meant the players engage more with a story, which is basically inexistent. They're more interested, more involved, more engaged, but at the same time, they get weary and tired earlier. So it's, some things that maybe we could have get, but yeah. And all of this was done in cooperation with students from the design school. I need to mention Eric Andersen. He was actually the student responsible for making the game.
Very, very nice and very interesting results as well. When you got into this, were you expecting something in particular, or was this, just what came up?
Well, we had this hypothesis that they would be more engaged with the game because, you basically bring your body in the experience a lot more than just pressing a button. We didn't really expect for the players to get a bit more wary, a bit more tired earlier. But it makes a lot of sense when you think about the fact that they actually use more of their body. So the wariness probably comes from more engagement in the corporal sense.
Interesting, very interesting results as well. And Alessandro, we've now known some of your research. We also would like to get into other things as well. Some things like, what are you doing in a regular day? Like, what does being Alessandro in a day like today look like? What's your I don't know, daily routine, or what are the things that you're doing nowadays?
Well, I mean, I guess I can describe today because it's pretty representative. So I live with my son, and we go take a little swim when we wake up, and then I take him to school. Then I go to the office, answer emails, I teach, and I try to fit in a little bit of research if I can. I'm actually finishing a book with previous colleagues. It's a sequel to our game analytics book. It's actually a textbook for schools that unravels the methods and the research that has been done in terms of game analytics. So yeah, I try to finish that. We are supposed to wrap it up in next week, so there's a lot of that in this book.
Lots of work going on there.
Exactly. I pick up my son. I cook a little bit. We play. We build Lego. We started making board games together. Actually, he's 5, but he has already a lot of fun. Then we have dinner, and then after dinner, work a bit more in this particular period, finishing the book. And then I have several funded projects that I'm attending to, so I have to deliver on that as well. The funding projects, that actually one of them, it's trying to validate a serious game that we developed together with the master students at the design school. And the game is based on a Ellen MacArthur Foundation report on sustainable economy and what's it called, circular production and disposal of food. So it's a game that tries to teach a lot to players, but is doing so not by exposing them to text to read, but just having players engaged with the systems. So we developed a questionnaire for the players to take before they play, then they play half an hour, and then a couple of days after answer the questionnaire again. And we are noticing an increase of about 30% of accuracy of their answers in the questionnaire.
Nice. So it seems they're learning something, or they're changing their minds about something, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. The way we've done it, we used Kuliba's transformational framework and also Casper Hartevelt triadic design. Those are two philosophies for serious game design, and they've been very helpful for transforming the report from the MacArthur Foundation into systems that players engage with. And I'll give you an example. You have to constantly make decisions about what type of food to produce, and you choose between vegetables, meat, or insects or algae. And some foods produce more calories, for example, so that they can feed more population, but they have an impact on how much energy is used to produce them, how much money it costs, how much money they generate, and what is the disposal and the waste generated as well. So while players make all these decisions, they are constantly informed about the consequences of their actions, and that's where the learning part seems to happen a lot.
Wow, and it's actually, I mean, you some people might think like, oh no, but this sort of thing is for simple things, you can learn with using a game for some simple stuff, but this seems to be like, dense matter. This is something that, it's not just, I don't know, like that's something simple that you can just figure out. It's actually dense. It's interesting. It has depth is what I mean. It's not a simplified topic, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's as you said, it's non-trivial information that reading just would only take you so far, because it's also sometimes a bit of an alien subject matter that is a bit removed. For example, thinking in terms of producing algae for food. Of course, we all know that it's a possibility, but we don't do it daily. So engaging
Exactly.
it in the system as we design makes people understand exactly what are the implications of moving food production in that direction.
Wow, super, super interesting. And we're just like almost 10 minutes into the interview, and we've already seen many interesting things that you've done, that you're doing, a lot of success as well. But we also like to sort of kickstart the interview as well and jumpstart it with something different. And you've been involved in games many times, and you know that games are not only about success but also about learning from failure. So we would like to know of a time when you had, what you might call your favorite fail or first attempt in learning, and we want to, be behind that story. We want to be there with you. Can you tell us that story?
Okay, my most cogent and memorable failure was actually when we were trying to assess personality and reveal attitudes using a game. So basically, we used Fallout New Vegas. It's a game that came out like a long time ago, I think in 2011 or something like that. And basically, we created a whole new world, a whole new mission, a whole new set of characters for that game. It comes with modding tools that basically allow us to generate a lot more content without having to code the mechanics again. And then we created the world, the mission, and the characters, thinking about what is the broadest possible spectrum of behaviors that the game mechanics allow. And we were trying to see if it was possible to capture personality as coded by the Big Five theory. The Big Five, or more scientifically, the five-factor model, it's a model of personality that looks at 5 big factors that define how people behave in certain situations. There's openness to new experience, extraversion, conscientiousness, neuroticism or emotional stability, and agreeableness. For each one of these 5 factors, there are 6 facets. So all in all, we're looking at 30 facets that are scored between 0 and 100 that give you like a more or less personality fingerprint for every individual. We had this idea that we could look at advanced statistics and machine learning, basically ways to connect the behavior in the game with the personality scores that all the players, scored before starting to play. And our expectation was frustrated, because if you look at it as a whole, the game is about maybe an hour and a half. So it's like a kind of longer experience compared to the other one that I mentioned before about food production. And when you were looking at the 5 factors and the averages of behavior in terms of 1 hour and a half of playtime, we found very weak correlations. And we tried a lot. I'm not going into the details, but we tried a lot of different. It turns out actually that we just had to start looking at taking into consideration how the context shapes behavior. I'll give you an example. When you start this game, you're in a house and you have like a few people to talk to. And we noticed 2 main differences: people that explore everywhere in this house, and people that just talk to the 2-3 people that they are supposed to, the non-playing characters, and then they get out of the house. As soon as they're out of the house, the people that were exploring everywhere, they started being very much more Spartan with their movements. They were going from one NPC to another, from one area of interest to the other without much exploration, while the people that were really sparse in terms of exploration in the house reverted their behavior and started roaming freely in this gigantic outdoor area that we designed. Now, I can actually ask you to try to guess. In terms of like these 2 groups of people, we noticed that the people that, so which one would you say was more open to new experiences? The people that explored the house very thoroughly and then were more sparse outdoors, or the people that were sparse indoors and just explore extensively the outdoors?
I would say that the ones that only spoke to the characters and went straight for the experience. That would be my guess.
Yes, exactly. So it turns out that the same type of behavior is instantiated by different people in different contexts. So in the house, is in a small space, and you have to speak to a few people. So people that are the players that were less open to new experience were somewhat confident in exploring the small space of the house, but as soon as they went outside, they were maybe somewhat intimidated by the openness, so they started being a lot more on rails. While the players that reported a high level of openness to new experience, when they were in the house, they felt a little claustrophobic. They had to speak with the people that they had to, the NPCs, and then as soon as they were out, they just felt like some kind of relief, and they started mining and drilling and exploring as much as they could. So being able to account for personality means being able to account also for the context where the actions happen. There's a famous theory called the field theory, that says that behavior is a function of personality and context. So before, other researchers looked at the same thing but discounted the power of context, and we started actually looking into it, so that the analysis we ran after was not for the whole game, but was for each individual area. Each individual area had its own different ways of relating to its own requirement in terms of things to do or things that they had to do. So once we started looking at this way, we started having really strong correlations between behavior and personality.
Wow, very, very interesting and very eye-opening when, thinking about these things. We like to talk about player types. We like to talk about, who your audience is, understanding it as much as possible, and introducing the element of context is definitely super, super important. We were talking the other day, I don't know if you were familiar with Nick Yee from Quantic Foundry.
Absolutely, yes. Actually, a lot of the work in this field was done exactly by Nick.
Exactly. So one of the things that he was talking about was, sort of comparing player types to personality tests. So there are these sort of stable types and those things that sort of don't change in somebody. But of course, depending on the context, some things might shift to a bit more to one side or to the other. But in the case that you're mentioning here, it's not that it's changing. It's that if you're an explorer, you're an open space person, you're in this house, so you're trying to come out. The context is not letting you explore because you're sort of closed inside this house, and that's why you speak to those people and get out quickly. That's what you want to do. You want to go out and explore. Yeah. So it's actually like it reinforces the fact that these personality types might be sort of stable, but depending on the context, the behavior is different. It doesn't mean that they're being other people or anything. So I don't know. I find it very interesting. And I love the way that you turned it around into you're not getting any correlation, which is super important when researching. And you start looking around and seeing the other things that might be influencing this situation.
Exactly.
So Alessandro, again, we've talked about your successes as well. We've talked about this fail situation. When you're approaching either your research on games or when you're creating a game or researching about a game, do you have some sort of process that you go through? Like, how do you do it? Let's say tomorrow you start into a new project. What would be the things that you do? What comes first, second, and third if you have some sort of structured way of doing these things?
Well, I guess this is the same for pretty much every researcher. It's about mapping what's been done before and figuring out what is the state of the art, and then building or looking for partners with the expertise to be able to push that state of the art. So I have a couple of examples. One again was another research trying to map motivations with behavior. And in this case, it turns out that correlations are just not enough. Linear correlation look at when two variables change at the same time. There's actually there's a lot of evidence that behaviors and personality don't have necessarily a linear correlation. So we basically have to start looking at advanced statistics and machine learning methods to be able to, make sense of the covariance of different variables. Nikki was actually pioneering the use of Monte Carlo tree searches to be able to do this analysis. We actually started looking at support vector machines. Now, I'm not sure this is the right level of for your audience, but stop me if you think it's too much. So support vector machines actually seems to be a good tool for looking for these correlations, or they're not correlations anymore. Another example. So in this case, for example, I had to learn how to run SVM, how to create SVMs, which was not trivial. In some other
what is an SVM? Sorry,
the support vector machine.
Okay.
Yeah. There's other situations where, like I think you mentioned it earlier, the work in terms of predicting the motivation based on gameplay behavior. In that case, I actually partnered with the researchers from the University of Malta, Yorgos Yannakakis, David Melhart, and Ahmad Azadvar is a PhD student, and I'm supervising in Ubisoft right now. And together we were able to solve that little problem. Pulling a lot of different knowledge from a lot of different people. So in terms of process, I'd say looking at what's been done before, figuring out what's the bar, and then pushing it by either learning something new that I can contribute or partnering with somebody that already is at the top of their game in that field.
And validating and navigating all of that. So that sounds absolutely fantastic, Alessandro. Just a quick break before we continue. Are you enjoying this podcast? If you're listening through a podcasting app, please subscribe and rate us on the app. This will be of great help to reach more engagers so we can change the world together through gamification. Again, within the field of game and player research, is there something that you would say is sort of a best practice? Something that, if you're doing that research for understanding your players, understanding their motivations, something that you should sort of take into account, try to do almost every time, and that would help you improve your results?
You're asking me if there is a fixed process to tackle?
No, a best practice. Like, if you can, I'm just going to say something off the top of my head. If you always consider, the players who are very explorative, that's going to help you figure out the rest of the players. I don't know. I'm making this up entirely, but is there?
Well, yeah, I think it's actually looking at players interacting with a game. That is incredibly helpful because it can put you in the right direction. I'll give you an example. The research that I mentioned before, where we found out that context was too important to leave out, we kind of discovered it by looking at people play. And, if you cannot look directly, there's ways to, get a synthetic look. For example, at Northeastern, we developed a tool for which we actually have a patent that allows us to look at heat maps in a dynamic way and to create Boolean operations across different heat maps so that you can ask complex questions. For example, when and where did players reload and then get shot by an enemy? So that you can create complex queries, and then you can see the visualization as a dynamic heat map that plays out over the map of the level. So observing players in all the different way of the different meanings of observe, either directly or through these enhanced observing tools like the strat mapper, as we call it.
Absolutely fantastic. That sounds like a very, very good practice. Definitely, like looking at the players directly or indirectly if that is not possible. I think that would be a fantastic way of figuring out whatever it is you're trying to see, because sometimes we sort of get stuck in hypothesizing and thinking and, stuck in our own heads or in the heads of our team, and we're discussing and talking about it. Sometimes you have to sort of go out to the field again, physically or synthetically. You have to go onto the field and figure out and see what people are actually doing. So I think it's a very, very good practice. Absolutely, Alessandro. And after hearing these things, and actually this is something we sort of commented on before we got into the interview on the pre-interview chat, is there somebody that you would like to listen to that we interview here in this podcast in Professor Game?
I would like to listen to Professor Jichen Zhu from Drexel University in Philadelphia, because she works with games, but she also has a special interest in explainable AI. So I think I would like to hear from her. And Professor Julian Togelius from New York University.
Those sound like very, very, very interesting profiles as well. We'll probably get into contact with them to have them on the podcast. And in that same sense of recommendations, is there a book that you recommend our audience? Again, the engagers, people who are looking at, understanding the players, creating things for these players, and creating these games or using them for some sort of purpose. Is there something that comes to your mind?
Well, I hate to be that guy, but I have to mention the book that we're finishing now. It's going to be called Game Data Science, and published by Oxford University Press. Probably it's going to be out early next year.
Nice. That sounds very, very interesting. And of course, looking at it right, imagine you're seeing your book in a bookshelf. Is there a book right next to it that you would like to recommend as well?
So I'm just looking at it from a purely functional point of view. It's our previous book that was called Game Analytics. So while the second volume is going to be fully written by the authors, and it's a manual on how to do game analytics, the first one was an edited collection of contribution from people from the industry and academia, and what is the state of the art in terms of game analytics, how to look at player-generated data and how to make sense of it.
Sounds good. That makes a lot of sense and makes functional sense, as you mentioned. Then again, we're getting into recommendations. So I would like to know, and this might be a difficult question. You're into games. Seems like you're talking about games and doing games and researching games all the time. So you're probably exposed to quite a few of them. And what would you say in that sense is your favorite game?
Oh, well, historically speaking, the game that opened my eyes in terms of what are the expressive potential for the players to express themselves was actually Deus Ex. I think it was the first time that I felt that I could choose my own way to solve challenge. The first Deus Ex from like, I think 99 or 2000, it was like 20 years ago. But I have to say, recently, against my better judgment, I enjoyed a lot more than I expected Death Stranding by Hideo Kojima. I don't know if you heard about this game. You basically have to cart gigantic cargo on your back, walking across the desolated plains of Iceland. And you do that for like 30, 40 hours. It sounds kind of a bit trite and boring, but I had a lot of fun optimizing the distribution of the weight of my cargo to see how many fridges I could bring across the plains of Iceland. But there's something about the way they rendered the aesthetics of the place with an incredible pairing of music and the suspense created by the enemies of the game that just made that a particularly aesthetic experience for me, meditative almost.
Interesting. And talking about these things and probably in player and gamer research, what would you say is your superpower? That thing that you feel great at doing, that you probably do better as well than most of the other people.
Okay, so I don't think I have it because when I look at most people, I think they are like much better than me. That's why I often pair up with partners and experts that help me with their. Maybe I have. Yeah, okay. So I can actually see a pattern where many cases where there was a difficult analysis that I didn't know how to solve. Not knowing a lot about any particular discipline, I'm actually able to surf through different disciplines. For example, a couple of years ago, we were trying to model the sequence of actions that players take into the games, not looking at an aggregation of their actions throughout a whole play session, but looking at the order in which they do them. I give you an example. If you engage in a fight and then open the inventory, regroup, and heal yourself, is a very different approach than somebody that opens the inventory first, plans which weapon to use and which tools to deploy, and then enters a fight. So the same action, if you don't look at the order in which they happen, you lose a lot of information. So we wanted to be able to model the order in which players do their actions as well. And then in order to do that, I started looking at molecular biology because sequencing is what people do when they do molecular and DNA analysis. So I borrowed algorithms from biology basically to make sense on the actions of the players. And we had quite a lot of success. So being able to look out of my domain and see how other domains have solved similar problems, I'd say that that's my superpower. I've done something similar with social network analysis, trying to apply it to game communities. But and again, with a certain level of success, we got honorable mention at CAI last year for this social network analysis paper.
Nice. That sounds very, very exciting as well. And congratulations, of course. And Alessandro, we've been talking about very interesting things, and I don't want to lose this opportunity to ask you a question coming from the audience. So we will find a random question from the many that we've had before, and we will, take it directly from our engagers. So, okay, this one could be an interesting one, and I think with your background on player engagement and their motivations, it might be one of the right questions to ask you. So, when you are going to create a game, right? So this person, I'm guessing that they're starting or they're going to start creating a game. How do you decide if you should go ahead or drop the idea? I'm guessing that this has a lot to do as well with, do you think your players will like it? Do you figure out if they will engage with it? Can you help this person understand how to, or at least a path to how to figure this out?
Okay. It's interesting because so at Ubisoft, there is a procedure to vet different ideas and to see them to completion. And so I can answer from the industry point of view, what are the requirements to be able to make it through the green lighting process. But I don't know how informative it is because a lot of the checks are rooted into the culture of the company more than in guarantee for success, if you know what I mean.
Oh, of course. Guarantee for success. I don't even think Ubisoft, with all the success that they've had, can actually guarantee success. That's really, really hard, especially in such a competitive industry. What would be your thoughts around this? Again, you can take from Ubisoft, from what you've observed, maybe. Like, what would be your thoughts around something like this?
So at this point, I guess a certain amount of personal preferences and likes and dislikes comes in my answer, basically. So I'm not saying that this is the only way, but I'm telling you these are how I make sure that the games the games that either my students or I make have a future. I kind of require for the games to be able to allow the players to express themselves. Even in a simple game, for example, like the tower defense, there are ways where you can develop your own style and your own way to like play it. So I think games like Limbo are absolutely stellar. They are masterpieces. I really like the work that Playdead is doing a lot. But those are not the games that I would do, because in a way you play the game that was designed for you and you have zero expressive power. You receive a lot, but you don't give a lot.
Interesting. So, Alessandro, thank you very much for all the insights, all the experience you've brought in today. Is there any final words you want to give the engagers before you let us know where we can find you?
Well, I mean, I guess stay curious. Yeah. Steve Jobs' words, stay hungry. I think is probably the advice you can give to anyone.
Absolutely. So, Alessandro, where can we find you in the world of the internet? I'm sure many people are now curious about your work, about what you're doing, want to maybe ask you more questions. Is there a way that we can interact with you? I don't know, on social media, a website? Where can we find more about Alessandro?
I checked out of social media a couple of years ago. So I don't engage with Twitter, nor with Facebook, nor with Instagram. Yeah, it's pretty old school, but yeah, I think I kind of needed it. And so I guess the best way is to the official channel at my email at the design school. It's alec@kadk.dk.
Interesting. Thank you very much for that, Alessandro. Giving your email is a very generous move as well. So thank you for that. Thank you for all your insights. I'm sure that the engagers have gotten a lot from this, because there's a lot of value in what you are offering today. However, at least for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over. Engagers, it is fantastic to have you here, because, this podcast makes sense because we have you. So let's connect on Twitter. That way you can let me know what things you want, what questions you have, if you have any guests you'd like to have on, I don't know, if there's anything we can help out with, if there's any doubts, anything exciting coming up, you can let us know. You can find my Twitter account in professorgame.com/Twitter. Always very frequently sharing content on game-based solutions, gamification, game-based learning, especially around education and learning, which is, as you know, my main jazz. So before you click continue, please go ahead and subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.